They saw my uniform, not my mind. They saw my brown skin, not my spirit. For 364 days, I was just the guy who brought them their packages. A ghost in a brown shirt, a walking, breathing piece of the background scenery they never bothered to notice. But on the 365th day, that all changed. Because on that day, I saw the one thing that 20 of the brightest minds in the country couldn't. My name is Leo James, and my story starts in the cold, sterile hallways of Aetheria Dynamics, a place where geniuses built the future, and I just delivered the boxes it came in. Every morning at 10:15 a.m., I'd push my dolly through the gleaming glass doors. The air inside always smelled like clean electricity and ambition. I'd nod at the security guard, a man named Frank, who was the only one who ever learned my name. "Morning, Leo," he'd say. "Morning, Frank," I'd reply. That 2-second exchange was often the most human interaction I'd have all day inside those walls. I'd make my rounds. The marketing department on the second floor, a symphony of clicking keyboards and cheerful chatter that'd die down to a murmur the second I walked in. The executive suites on the top floor, where men in sharp suits would walk right past me as if I were a coat rack, their voices booming about quarterly projections and market shares. But my last stop was always the one that fascinated me the most, the R&D lab, Lab 7. Behind a heavy door with a biometric scanner was a world of wonder. Giant humming machines, holographic displays flickering with complex data, and a congregation of people in white lab coats who moved with an air of frantic importance. They were the engineers, the problem solvers, the gods of this technological temple. And for the last 6 months, they had been failing. Their Olympus was crumbling because of one machine, the Weaver. It was a magnificent, terrifyingly complex piece of equipment that manufactured a tiny, biocompatible filament thinner than a human hair. This filament was the key component in a new generation of neural implants that could help paralyzed people walk again. It was world-changing stuff. But it wasn't working. Every batch had microscopic flaws, tiny, invisible fractures in the filament that made it useless. They had 20 engineers on it, day and night, Ivy League graduates, industry legends, people with patents to their names and letters after their names that I couldn't even pronounce. And they were all stumped. I knew this because I was invisible. And when you're invisible, you overhear everything. "The thermal regulators are stable," one would shout in frustration, throwing a tablet onto a workbench. "We've recalibrated the quantum stabilizers 3 times. The math is solid," another would counter, his voice tight with exhaustion. "It has to be a software bug, a ghost in the machine," a third would mutter, rubbing his temples. They never looked at me. I'd slide their packages onto the designated receiving shelf, get the digital signature on my handheld, and slip back out, a silent witness to their brilliant desperation. But I wasn't just a witness. I was a student. You see, what they didn't know was that the man in the brown uniform had once dreamed of wearing a white lab coat himself. I had a full scholarship to study mechanical engineering. I was 2 years in, top of my class, when my mom got sick. The kind of sick that needs someone home full-time. The kind of sick that drains every penny you've ever saved. So I dropped out. I told myself it was temporary, but temporary turned into years. The dream faded, crusted over by the need to pay bills and buy medicine. The delivery job paid the bills. It was honest work. But every time I walked into that lab, a part of my heart ached for the life that could have been. I didn't just drop off packages. I watched. I listened. I learned more from their frustrated shouts and discarded schematics than I ever could have in a lecture hall. I started to understand the Weaver not as they did, as a collection of systems and subroutines, but as a living thing, a creature with a rhythm, a personality, and I started to notice things they didn't. We all know what it feels like to be overlooked, to have a voice that no one hears. If you've ever felt that way, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for you, and you're not alone. Let's get back to how Leo started to see what no one else could. The problem wasn't getting better, it was getting worse. The pressure from the company's CEO, a formidable woman named Miss Alvarez, was immense. The company was losing millions, but more than that, hope for thousands of patients was dwindling with every failed test. The mood in Lab 7 turned from frustration to despair. The air grew thick with the smell of burnt coffee and failure. On Tuesday, I was making my delivery, and the lead engineer, a man named Mr. Harrison, was having a full-blown meltdown. He was brilliant, everyone knew it, but his pride was as big as his intellect. He saw the world in a hierarchy, and he was at the top. Delivery drivers were somewhere near the floor tiles, just above the floor tiles. "Another failed batch," he roared, slamming his fist on a console. The whole lab flinched. 20 of you, 20 of the best minds in the field, and we can't solve a simple manufacturing defect. What are they paying us for? His eyes scanned the room, filled with fire, and for a split second, they landed on me. But they didn't see me. They saw my uniform. It was a look of pure dismissal. My presence was an annoyance, an interruption to his very important crisis. He turned his back to me again, a clear dismissal. The entire room went back to their work, leaving me standing alone in a sea of humiliation. My heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. I'd never felt so small, so utterly worthless. I turned, grabbed my dolly, and walked out of that lab with my head down, the sound of their quiet laughter echoing in my ears. The walk back to my truck was the longest walk of my life. I sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, and just stared at my hands. Hands that delivered boxes, hands that weren't good enough. Maybe he was right. Who was I? But as I sat there, stewing in my own shame, there was a soft knock on my truck window. I looked up and saw a young woman from the lab, a junior engineer. I'd seen her around. She was always quiet, always observing, often pushed aside by the more senior men. Her name was Sarah. I rolled down the window. "Hi," she said, looking nervous. "I'm Sarah. I was in there. I heard what you said." I just nodded, unable to speak. "Harrison he's a jerk. He's under a lot of pressure, but that's no excuse." She bit her lip. "What you said about the vibration, can you tell me exactly what you saw?" For the first time that day, someone was looking at me, not through me. Someone was asking for my opinion, not my signature. I hesitated, the sting of Harrison's words still fresh, but there was a kindness in her eyes, a genuine curiosity. So I told her. I explained the tremor I saw in the beaker, the timing with Hector's cleaning schedule, the idea of the harmonic resonance. I didn't use any fancy terms, just simple words. It's like a tiny, invisible earthquake that only the machine can feel. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She wasn't laughing. She was thinking. "A mechanical resonance from an external source," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "We've been looking for a ghost in the machine, but maybe the ghost is in the building." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning realization. "We haven't tested for that. We've isolated for everything: electromagnetic interference, temperature fluctuations, software glitches, but not low-frequency structural vibrations." A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. "You believe me?" "I believe it's a variable we haven't accounted for," she said carefully. "And at this point, we're out of other ideas. It's crazy, but it's the only thing that makes a weird kind of sense." She paused, a look of determination hardening her features. "I'm going to run a test." "Harrison will never let you," I said. "He'll laugh you out of the room." "He doesn't have to know what we're testing for."
she said with a small, defiant smile. "I'll tell him I want to run a baseline diagnostic with minimal external stimuli. That means no non-essential personnel or activity on the entire floor, including the cleaning crew." My fart skipped a beat. She was putting her neck on the line. For me, for my crazy idea. "The next run is scheduled tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. I'll make sure Hector and his buffer are nowhere near the lab. Will you be here?" I nodded slowly. "I make my delivery at 10:15. "Good," she said. "Wait by the loading dock. I'll come find you." She turned and walked back towards the glass doors, leaving me sitting in my truck, a storm of emotions swirling inside me, hope, fear, and a terrifying sense of what was at stake.
My simple observation was about to go head-to-head with 6 months of failure and 20 brilliant minds. And a small, quiet part of me was terrified of what would happen if I was right. The tension is building. Do you think Leo's theory is right? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. And if you're hooked on Leo's journey, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. It's about to get intense. The next morning, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The drive to Aetheria Dynamics felt different. The building didn't look like just another stop on my route. It looked like a courthouse where my worth was about to be put on trial. I did my rounds in a daze, my mind a million miles away in Lab 7. When I got there at 10:15, the atmosphere was funereal. No one spoke. Mr. Harrison was pacing like a caged tiger. Miss Alvarez, the CEO, was there herself, standing with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The pressure was so thick you could taste it. Sarah caught my eye from across the room and gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. She had done it. The floor was on lockdown. No cleaning crew, no Hector, no floor buffer. I dropped off my packages and left the lab, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I went to the loading dock as she'd asked, but I couldn't just stand there. I had to see. I found a small service corridor with a window that looks directly into Lab 7. It was a dusty, forgotten little alcove, the perfect hiding spot for an invisible man. Through the glass, I watched them start the sequence. The lights on the Weaver pulsed to life. The robotic arms began their delicate, intricate dance. It was mesmerizing. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. The normal time it took for the flaws to appear. I saw Sarah at a monitoring station, her face pale. I saw Harrison staring at the main screen, his jaw clenched. Miss Alvarez was watching him, her gaze like a hawk's. The entire company's future, the hope of thousands of patients, was hanging in this single moment. Then, the run was complete. The results started processing. A graph began to form on the main screen. In every previous test, it would have shown red spikes, indicating the microfractures. The room was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing fogging up the little window. The line on the graph stayed flat and green, perfectly, impossibly green. A collective gasp went through the lab. Someone whispered, "No fractures. It's perfect." Another engineer ran a secondary diagnostic. "He's right. The batch is 100% stable. Zero structural degradation." The room erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned, disbelieving chatter. They had done it. They had finally done it. Harrison stared at the screen, his face a mixture of relief and utter confusion. He turned to his team. "What did we do? What was different?" No one had an answer. They had run the same protocols, the same software, the same calibrations. Then Sarah's voice, clear and steady, cut through the noise. "It wasn't something we did, sir." All eyes turned to her. Harrison looked at her, bewildered. "What do you mean, Sarah?"
She took a deep breath. I isolated the lab from low-frequency structural vibrations as a precaution. Harrison frowned. Vibrations? What vibrations? And then Sarah did the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do. She looked past her boss, past the other 20 engineers, and pointed. She pointed directly at the little window of the service corridor. She pointed directly at me. Every head in the room turned. 21 pairs of eyes, including Mr. Harrison's and Miss Alvarez's, were suddenly locked on me. The invisible man was suddenly the most visible person in the world. My cover was blown. My heart hammered against my ribs, and for a second, I thought about running. But then I saw the look on Sarah's face. It was a look of trust, and I knew I couldn't run. I pushed the corridor door open and stepped into the lab. The silence was absolute. I was no longer the delivery driver. I was a mystery they had to solve. Mr. Harrison walked towards me, his face unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, and for the first time, he looked at me. I mean, he really looked at me. He saw my face, my eyes, the person standing inside the uniform. "You," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The floor buffer." I just nodded. The reality of it seemed to land on him like a physical weight. His shoulders sagged. The arrogance, the pride, it all just melted away, replaced by a look of profound, humbling shock. He, with all his degrees and all his genius, had been beaten by a simple observation from a man he wouldn't have given the time of day. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the perfect green line on the screen, then back at me. He took a step forward and extended his hand. I am so sorry," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It sounded like shame, but also like gratitude. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. Thank you. I shook his hand. It was a firm, solid grip. The grip of a man who had just been fundamentally changed. But the story doesn't end there, because Miss Alvarez, the CEO, had been watching the entire exchange. She walked over, her heels clicking decisively on the floor. She had an aura of power that was both intimidating and impressive. She looked from Harrison to me. She asked, "Leo, is it?" "Yes, ma'am. Leo James." "Mr. Harrison tells me you deliver our packages, but I don't believe that's all you are." That wasn't a lucky guess. That was an engineering diagnosis. "Tell me your story." And so I did. Standing there in the middle of Lab 7, surrounded by the best minds in the company, I told her everything. About my scholarship, about my mom, about dropping out, about the dream I thought was dead. When I finished, the lab was silent again. Miss Alvarez studied me for a long moment. "In this company, we value results, we value innovation, and we value seeing things from a different perspective. It seems we've had one of our greatest assets walking in and out of our building every day, and we were too blind to see it." She turned to Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, I trust you'll handle the paperwork." Then she turned back to me. "Mr. James, how would you like to trade in that brown uniform for a lab coat? Aetheria Dynamics would be honored to offer you a full-time position as a junior diagnostic engineer on this team. We'll also cover the full tuition for you to complete your engineering degree any way you see fit." The air left my lungs. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. A job. School. The dream. The dream I had buried and mourned for years was being handed back to me, right here, right now. Tears welled in my eyes. Tears of shock, of relief, of a joy so profound it physically hurt. "Yes," I managed to choke out. "Yes, thank you." The moment Leo was finally seen for who he really is, it gives me goosebumps every time. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because stories like this are what we're all about, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. The next Monday, I walked through the gleaming glass doors of Aetheria Dynamics. I wasn't wearing my brown uniform. I was wearing a crisp new shirt and slacks with a brand new ID badge clipped to my pocket. It didn't say Courier. It said Leo James, R&D Division. As I walked past the security desk, Frank looked up and did a double take. A huge grin spread across his face. "Well, look at you," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Good morning, Mr. James." "Good morning, Frank," and my own smile felt like it could light up the entire building. I walked towards Lab 7. The engineers who had once snickered at me now nodded in respect. Sarah greeted me at the door with a coffee and a lab coat that had my name on it.
As I slid it on, it felt like coming home. I looked over at the Weaver, humming its perfect, steady rhythm. The machine that had caused so much frustration was now the symbol of my new beginning. And standing beside it was Mr. Harrison. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Ready to get to work, Leo?" he asked. There was no condescension in his voice, only partnership. "Ready," I said. They had ignored the black delivery driver. They had looked past the man in the simple uniform. But they couldn't ignore the solution. They couldn't ignore the truth. I spent years feeling invisible, a ghost in their hallways. But in the end, it was that very invisibility that allowed me to see what they all missed. And in doing so, I finally made them see me, all of me.